So welcome to everyone. You already heard Kimberly and myself talking a little bit here. So yeah, thanks for your interest in this webinar and joining and learning about the engagement guide that recently has been launched. So my name is Caroline Glowka from the Global Coffee Platform. I'm the program manager and I'm facilitating the Collective Action Network Gender and Youth. With me is Kimberly Easton, Strategic Director from the Coffee Quality Institute. And today we will take you through this webinar. Maybe a few technology things up front. So at this point, we will mute everyone so that we don't have any side noises. But at the end, then we'll have time for questions and comments. And then you can put that into the question and answer session or in the chat, or also raise your hand. That you would have to do, but I can also unmute from my side if you have any difficulties doing that. Okay, with that, I would like to move on with the agenda today. So I'd like to give a short introduction on where the Collective Action Network Gender and Youth is at the moment and where we're going to go this year. And Kimberly is taking you then through the engagement guide, how to address gender issues in the supply chain. And then we will finish off this session in how to get engaged in this network more and what the next events are that we're planning. So looking again at the goal of this collective action networks, it's identifying and responding to gender inequities at origin to empower communities and build resilience together. So that's where we're heading with this action network. We have launched it last year, and here are some of the participants that have contributed to the development of the engagement guide and also the common measurement framework, and also participated in the webinars. So looking at what had happened last year, we launched the Collective Action Network Gender and Youth. We had quite a few inputs from various organizations, from the civil society organizations, but also from the private sector, giving examples on what they work already. And also giving the direction then for the development of the engagement guide and the common measurement framework, where there was a workshop at AFCA and also in Geneva conducted to get feedback and to progress that work. There was close consultation with the sector and also a technical advisory group established to finish those two tools. Looking at this year, 2018, we will start, or have started already, on a broader dissemination of the engagement guide and the common measurement framework, because we believe we want to take these forward and used, and then also share the learnings from them, and yeah, maybe improve them also, yeah, where we see improvement can be done. It's building the community of practice, and Kimberly will explain more about this when it's her turn. But also we will engage the national coffee platforms with whom GCP is closely working together to share their issues on gender and bring these back to the collective action networks to ultimately, yeah, have the collective action network work together and achieve then changes at origin. So that's the plan for this year. Looking at the time frame a little bit, so we have one big block of awareness building followed by action at origin. So January to February, we are going to emphasize the engagement guides to promote them and the common measurement framework in webinars, at meetings, and they're of course also available online for download. And there's also a workshop planned in Switzerland. Then May to August, we are going to engage more with members to define initiatives, to build strategies, to identify gender issues in their supply chain. And at the same time, we will develop with the national platforms or discuss with them their issues and bring proposals back to the group for collective action. And then looking towards the end of the year, which still seems like very far away, it's also, of course, the Collective Action Network is about sharing the learnings, not only when initiatives have been done, but also along the way. So the whole process of building an initiative, we will bring that back to the sector and then collectively have impact at origin. So that is the plan, but it only can work together and with your input. So how does collective action work? What does it actually mean? It's linking the global coffee stakeholders. So this would be very much the private sector here and the civil society. And the national coffee platforms with which the Global Coffee Platform is working together. So currently that's 9 countries in Honduras, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Uganda, Tanzania, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And Kenya, sorry, I forgot Kenya. So these are the national coffee platforms GCP is supporting. And looking at the stakeholder side, so civil society, but even more so the private sector, it's using the engagement guide and the common measurement framework, develop a strategy or even, next step to building an initiative, gather impulse and feedback from the network, implement, share learnings, and then report. But that will probably come later, as reporting can only be once learnings have been accumulated and the impact is understood. From the coffee platforms, from that side, we would like to identify stronger their issues in gender and get them embedded in their national priorities and strategies. Then from these issues, they should bring back proposals for solutions to the Collective Action Network and then invite the global coffee stakeholders to be part of that solution. So this is an ongoing process. That's why these arrows go up and down, because we want to address that together and move forward together. With that, I would like to hand over to Kimberly.
Great. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks. And it's great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And my name is Kimberly Easton. I know a number of you already on the phone, so it's great to see some familiar names and appreciate your time today. So I am the Strategic Director of the Partnership for Gender Equity, which is an initiative of the Coffee Quality Institute. We were founded about 3 years ago with the purpose to better understand how gender equity impacts the coffee supply chain, with particular focus on coffee quality and the well-being of coffee farming communities. So we're going to jump in rapidly into the agenda here, and what we want to do is focus on. Go to the next slide, Caroline. So essentially, this is what you saw in the invitation and what we're expecting that you'll get out of your participation today, to really understand what's in the guide, how to use the guide, and what they can actually mean for your business. understand the business case more deeply. One of the things we heard as we decided to create this engagement guide was that there needs to be a stronger business case for many people to be able to invest and to be able to convince their stakeholders and management in companies why it's important to invest. We're going to talk about the gender dimensions of priority sustainability issues that have been identified through many processes linked to the Global Coffee Platform and the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, in terms of what do we see broadly as the sector as these priority sustainability issues. And then we're going to take a quick look at the conversation guides, but also we want to hear from you. You can go to the next slide, Caroline. In this agenda, you'll see at the bottom, we do want to hear from you. We want to understand what additional support and tools that you see would be helpful in terms of really helping to get into action and motivate gender equity in the coffee value chain, especially with the focus, we're really looking at coffee farming communities around the world. So if we jump in, what is the guide? What's in it, and how do we use it? I hope everybody's had a chance to download it and at least skim through it. It's 60 pages of rich content, so we don't expect everybody to jump in and read every part. And we've put together this handy table on page 5, which just indicates where you might want to start to focus. A lot of people already have some expertise. Many companies are doing some things on the ground already or have been thinking about this issue for a long time. So you can pick up parts of the guide based on your level of knowledge and your level of interest. But essentially, we've lined up the guide in 2 separate parts. So the first is to dig in more deeply as to why gender equity is relevant to the coffee supply chain, linking closely to the business case, and also understanding more the relevance of data and how data supports strengthening that business case and how we can get involved in collecting data. And then the second is looking at these the main sustainability goals that the industry has identified, and what are the gender dimensions of these goals. And if we're looking at solutions to these sustainability issues, making sure that the solutions we bring forth are gender sensitive and address the existing gender issues as part of these addressing the sustainability goals. So we're going to spend the next few minutes, go to the next slide, Caroline, please, looking at the business case. And this is really how we, after many conversations globally with different people, actors in the coffee supply chain, kind of how we conceive the business case. And there are 4 key points that I want to walk through, and I'd like to ask you to be thinking and to be ready to reflect after I go through these 4 points as to, are these the right points? Are these points strong enough for a business case for yourself if you're the decision maker in your company, or presenting this to other decision makers and stakeholders within your environment? And then what's lacking? That would be very helpful. So if we move to the first issue, and there are a few bullet points here on this slide, this is really about reducing the inequalities between men and women. And we use this often cited data point from the FAO. It's that if we can address the unequal access to productive resources between men and women, that we can actually increase output and maximize productivity of women, and increasing their yields by 20 to 30%. This is not coffee specific. There is not a lot of coffee specific data available. There is starting to be more. As you see in the second point, there's information from cocoa in Uganda, and then cocoa in Ghana, and coffee in Guatemala and Uganda, that show that when women have equal access to resources, their productivity can actually match that of men. The second argument is addressing incentives. You can move to the next slide, Caroline. And what we see here is that we can actually mitigate risk to the coffee supply chain by addressing incentives or lack thereof, especially for women. And the idea here is that we have men and women working on coffee farms, but women's lack of participation in marketing and in some cases in decision making and control over the income that's received from coffee, that it actually can end up reducing their incentive to participate or to do a good job with the work that they do. And oftentimes, the money coming into the household, there's not a discussion about how money is spent. And so if you can actually sit at the table together and decide on how income is spent, that maybe you don't have to control it per se, but that your interest, and kind of thinking of the women here in wanting to maximize and improve and make sure that the business succeeds is increased. And so the idea is that we can improve the well-being of the families and the supply chain by more equal decision making at the household level. And it has a lot to do with general household dynamics that are based on cultural issues. And so, for example, there is an example, you see the bullet point at the bottom in Uganda, where some women in coffee producing were side selling beans for small amounts of cash, meaning that coffee is taken out of the supply chain. So by encouraging and incentivizing women's participation, that we can actually reduce or mitigate the risks to the supply chain. If we move on to the third point, this one talks about eliminating assumptions that we have. In many places, men are farmers and women are not considered to be farmers. And so therefore women can be overlooked when it comes and underserved when it comes to access to extension services. And often there are laws and policies that treat men and women differently with regards to access to credit. Of course, there are many places where a husband is still required his signature to co-sign a loan. And these are fueled by assumptions about men and women's roles in society. And so, but as businesses, when we build our business practices based on these assumptions, we can often miss opportunities to get information into the hands of those people that are actually doing the job and who can actually put that information to best use to improve the supply chain. So, for example, if women are highly active in sorting or drying coffee beans, that you want to ensure that they get the information about how to best do that task. And you see here, there are some numbers on extension services. These are, again, not specifically coffee related, and the data is a little bit old, but that there are only 15% of the world's extension agents are women. Only 10% of total aid for agriculture, forestry, and fishing goes to women, and that women farmers typically receive only about 5% of agricultural extension services overall. So that we want to make sure that the people that have access, that men and women have access to extension services. And then the fourth point is, so you can go to the next slide, Caroline. Great. So research suggests that supporting women and their families builds stronger, more resilient coffee farming communities. So this, of course, requires us to take a bit of a longer view in time. So we're investing intergenerationally, investing in women, the woman herself, which manifests more immediately in terms of their own health, her ability to make decisions about the farm, and also abilities to make decisions about her own body and health issues. Women tend to invest more frequently in the well-being of their families, meaning that you have better development outcomes. We see outmigration and demographic shifts, especially in Central America, but globally, where many farms are left in the hands of women because of outmigration. of men to the cities or to other countries in search of work, and that overall, if we can increase the access of women's their economic independence, that they can have greater equality in the household and personal freedoms. And so we look at this slide and it says it looks to be all about women, but there's a lot of the work that happens that we really want to look at men and women and how decision-making at the household level can influence overall the well-being of the family. And that can include the well-being of the men and male children as well, and more broadly in those communities. So those are the four arguments that we've put forth for the business case, and we've tested these out with a variety of audiences. So I'd love to hear a bit from you, or if you have kind of questions about these points. Caroline, if you'll go to the next slide. On the left side, we've got the four key points, and then we're curious, which arguments of these do you find the most compelling? Is there one or two that really stands out to you as yes, this is why my company or personally I think this issue is important? And then what's missing? Is there an argument that you know of that you would like to offer up to us to include here, or is there something that you think we need to look at? So, Caroline, I don't know if people are unmuted or if anybody wants to raise their hand and jump in.
Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Mary Pettit from a noisy location in New York.
Hey, Mary, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry I was late. We've had a strange storm situation here.
Okay.
I think these are all very valid and key arguments. And my question is, what is our plan to reach beyond our group that's on this call today and get people engaged in a larger discussion?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something that we will talk at. We have a slide kind of towards the end to talk about next steps and getting people into action. And so I think, one of the things that we have heard is helping people understand the business case for investing themselves or their companies, or encouraging investment from others, and designing partnerships that can help them get involved. So this, so what we want to know here is that are these the right points? And then we can look at if there needs to be additional support. This is one of the things that we want to reflect on at the end of the call. If there needs to be additional support, what would that look like? So would we have webinars that would specifically focus on helping people better understand and articulate the business case, for example?
Mary, Kimberly will also come back to that a little bit later, explaining when we come to the next steps, how we're going to get more people engaged into this. So we'll get back to your point.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Thank you. Any other reflections on on these key points?
Well, maybe we move on, and maybe people come back later with questions. Please note them down, and we're ready to also take questions later.
Great. Okay, so we're going to spend so this slide, we're not going to go into detail here about data measurement, but there is a bit of information in this first chapter that recommends how do we start to think about data collection. again, in order to have a strong business case, it is important to have the right kind of data and be able to use that data to build further what the return on investment for this kind of work is. And when we look at data measurement, we look at these three principles. So essentially participation, performance, and access to benefits. And you can see in each of the columns, we've highlighted just one of the number of bullet points that are there to give you a sense of what we're talking about. So increased participation is something that is often already measured. There more and more companies and organizations are collecting sex disaggregated data, for example. So the number of men and women attending training being a key data point around measuring increased participation. Also, we want to understand the difference in performance. Is performance actually improving by bringing a greater focus on gender equity? And so, do we have a greater number of women that are actually able to adopt new business practices? And then finally, making sure that the participants in the value chain are actually able to benefit from their participation, which is many times not the case. So that if you're creating more targeted programs, and this is something that would require probably, definitely requires more investment and more attention, that you would look at things like the satisfaction with rewards programs, or the growth in the number of women that are controlling income from engagement in the coffee sector. So it's almost like each of these pillars essentially is a bit of a more in-depth look at the well-being of the supply chain overall. Okay, so we're going to move into part 2, where we look at how to address gender issues in the coffee value chain. And what we've done here is really made an effort to communicate within the frameworks that are linked to other, the ongoing coffee conversations, and looking at the issues being organized around goals that are important to the industry. There are a number of other guides that look at the issue of gender. They tend to be more practitioner oriented, and this guide is really meant to be used by businesses. It's something that we recognized as a gap that we wanted to fill, a guide that would be targeted to businesses alone or with partners in supply chain activities. So, and I want to underscore that this guide is certainly not a complete reflection of what exists in the world in terms of ongoing practices. As Caroline mentioned, we had many conversations. We invited and we received many case studies of things that are happening. We included a number of them in the guide, and so we're not able to in this call, nor in the guide, to include everything. But this is just meant to give you a taste of what's happening and what's out there. In each of the sections, I'm going to go through the 4 sections, and in each of the sections, the idea is that first you understand the gender issues related to each of these core sustainability goals, that you can become familiar with the strategies for addressing these gender-based constraints, that we can learn about the work that's already happening with other businesses and stakeholders that are addressing these constraints, and then becoming familiar with tools that can help identify the appropriate strategies for your own organization. So if we look at point 1, maximizing productivity or optimizing productivity, you can go to the next slide, Caroline. These are the 5 key areas of focus. We don't have time to go into all 5 of them, and so we've selected a couple to look at in detail. But all smallholder farmers experience productivity constraints, and men and women experience these constraints differently. And in fact, the productivity gap for women is anywhere from 4 to 25%, depending on the country. And that's caused by this unequal access to these different resources. So if we move to the next slide, looking at finance, obviously across the board, a lack of finance for smallholder farmers forces them to forgo practices that would help improve their yields and the income, and also to make important long-term investments when it comes to like rehabilitation of coffee farms, for example. The design of traditional finance systems don't necessarily meet the needs of smallholder farmers, and especially women who face unique constraints. So, for example, not having land that can serve as collateral, not being members of farmer organizations, etc. So the idea is that helping farmers to have access to cash when they need it. And especially financial services that are tailored to meet the unique needs of women, products that help women invest when they have cash on hand, and then developing these alternative collateral requirements in line with the unique needs. The next point is on extension services. So one of the biggest opportunities is for farmers to adopt good agricultural practices to help improve yields and incomes and also mitigate climate risk. Often access to training is limited, and again, especially to women who because they're not members of farmer organizations, they're often not perceived to play critical roles in coffee production. And so there are a number of strategies that we can employ here. And I wanted to highlight specifically 2 examples that can give you a sense of how these strategies can work. There's a lot of good work happening around improving extension services and access for men and women smallholders. With TechnoServe, they have a specific focus on extension to women, where 36% of their clients are women, and they have a specific gender policy which looks at sensitizing men, getting support of community leaders that might have different traditional beliefs, supporting women to bring children to trainings, and training everyone on good agricultural practices, regardless of if their perceived role, or if their role is perceived to be as a traditional male or female role. And then, of course, Nespresso and the AAA program, they started in 2014 to actively track and report the number of women agronomists, and then work to recruit more women agronomists. And as you saw on the earlier slide, it's the World Bank estimates that only 15% of extension agents globally are women. And through this intentional focus by Nespresso, they've been able to achieve 30% in their East Africa program, and then specifically in Kenya, where the World Bank estimates are lower at 7% of women agronomists, they were able to achieve a 40% rate of women agronomists, which makes a big difference in terms of being role models and being able to communicate to different audiences, especially to women. So if we move on to the next issue, the second issue is all about climate change. And of course, it's no secret that climate change is a significant challenge to the sector overall. And climate change is a risk particularly burdensome to smallholder farmers, and again, also to women. And thankfully, there's already a lot of good work. Obviously, GCP has the Collective Action Network around climate change, and there are a number of resources that we've pointed out in the guide connected to climate change. So the key here is to make sure that these solutions directed towards climate change take into account the existing gender imbalances. So looking at women's lesser access to productive resources and assets, they access communications and information differently and in different channels. And they often have fewer resources to respond with appropriate agricultural practices. So some of the things that we talked about and that you see already in the productivity chapter apply to this. But looking at, for example, the strategies of encouraging intercropping for food security, right-sized technology packages for women, disseminating information via specific channels that are used by women, especially related to weather, And then promoting labor and time-saving technologies. Obviously, with climate change, often women are tasked with collecting water and firewood, and they therefore have to travel further and spend more time in these tasks as a result of climate change. Also, again, kind of tailoring financial tools. So if we look at the third issue, this is something that many companies have expressed concern about. There's a big concern that we're losing generations of coffee farming knowledge as people opt out of coffee. We have volatile prices and prolonged low prices to coffee farmers with little to no margins. And so this requires improving quality and productivity, and providing incentives for men and women farmers to stay engaged and actively committed to coffee production. So this section overall focuses on economic incentives for women and youth. Obviously, we've touched a lot already on the issue of related to women, and so here I've laid out a few things regarding strategies for the next generation, where we want to look at combining technical training with workplace experiences and apprenticeships that can build confidence for young people. Equipping young people with business skills, again, both men and women, using improving their financial and business acumen for being able to manage farms and coffee production. Also looking at, through partnerships, supporting the development of broader life skills. Oftentimes, communities, both young men and women, face social pressures, women in particular, social pressures to marry and to have children early, and that can weigh on them and their ability to be productive participants in the supply chain. And then, really looking again at young women's access to land, credit, and other assets based on the different constraints that they face overall. And then finally, we look at the issue of the well-being of farmers and the livelihoods of farmers. Excuse me. So essentially, many of the other points, the other 3 points, are very much focused on coffee as the product. Here we're looking beyond coffee to really consider the farmer, his or her family and community, and essentially expand our view that coffee is also about families and communities and people. And so in this subchapter, we describe the issues and strategies that the industry can use to support poverty reduction, improve the livelihoods of smallholder farmers. There's a lot of focus here on women's empowerment and well-being of women and families, looking at the time constraints that women face and how to alleviate some of those time constraints. Also looking at the importance of developing leadership and, excuse me, women's leadership in particular. And I wanted to highlight here, there are several places throughout the guide where we look at household methodologies, and in particular one which is called the Gender Action Learning System, where within a training focused at the household level, bringing together men and women farmers to help shift their perspectives about how they work together as a family. Excuse me, defining new ways of working together that can actually bring benefits to everyone in the household. And this can also, it's not listed here in terms of some of the outcomes, but by working with household methodologies, you can not only improve some of the development outcomes that we're looking for, but also the business outcomes, so that we can actually see increased productivity and quality and overall farm outcomes, in addition to looking more at equitable distribution of activities between men and women, sharing of resources and assets, more balanced decision making about how to spend the money, or how to use those resources, and greater confidence and leadership, both from men and women, to talk about the issue of gender equity, and actually then advocate within their communities for greater gender equity, and the impact that can have on families and communities and coffee outcomes. We do highlight a number of organizations that are using these kinds of methodologies. So, of course, from Bukanzo Joint in Uganda, Twin has done a lot of work here, and Ecom and Nestle have also employed some of these household methodologies in different supply chains. And of course, also it's something that the Partnership for Gender Equity has been advocating and also using in our work. Great. So that's those are the four key sustainability issues that we highlight in the chapter, and looking at how do we integrate gender methodologies in addressing these four goals. You can go to the next slide, Caroline. Okay, so getting into action, I think, Mary, this is a little bit, we'll start to get in a bit to your question. So what do we do with all of this information? How do we move forward? That's one of the main goals of the Collective Action Network, and of course the work of GCP and the Partnership for Gender Equity is to provide resources and support and really encourage greater action across the sector. So if you look at the next slide in the guide, we're not going to go through these in detail. Caroline, will you go to the next slide? On page 59 and 60, we have a series of conversation guides, and we recognize that many of you on this webinar, you're already convinced about the issue of gender equity and the opportunity for investing, but that you still may need tools and support to encourage other decision makers in your company or supply chain partners, or potentially funders or your customers, of the importance of getting involved. So the idea behind these conversation guides is that we have a series of questions that you could use within your company that could help you identify what are the right fit strategies and approaches for your particular supply chain. Of course, every company is different, every supply chain is different. So it takes some time to start to lay out what might be a plan or an approach within your company to accelerate gender equity in the value chain. So the first one is around clarifying values and building support. It's very much aligned with looking at, what are your business goals and the core values of your business, and discussing how these relate to the well-being of lives of men, women, girls, and boys who participate in the coffee value chain. There's a bit here that links back into the business case. How does the business case link into what your own particular goals are? There's a second conversation, which is about understanding gender issues in the supply chain. And this is more of a kind of a diagnostic or an assessment process. So starting to explore where men and women in your particular supply chain, where do they participate, and what might be the barriers to better performance or greater participation within the different aspects of your value chain activities. The third conversation is about aligning gender equity strategies with business goals, so taking it to the next step. Gender equity investments need to support both men and women, as well as have kind of that link to your competitiveness and the sustainability work you're doing in your value chain. So this conversation is really meant to help find that win-win scenario between kind of the gender equity being good for people, but also being good for business, and getting clear for your own company. And then finally, identifying partnerships and resources, because this is not an issue that many companies are able to deal with on their own. Most companies, and we encourage partnerships, because that's where you've got real in-depth gender expertise that can help support the work that you're already doing in your coffee value chain. And then also too, of course, there is a need for financial resources for this work, so that this conversation guide is all about helping to pull together the right partners and the right financial resources. So that was I know it's a lot of content headed your way. So we want to give you a few minutes to ask some questions, and then we'll talk a bit about next steps. And we also want to hear any reflections from you about how we can move forward. So first, maybe a few minutes on and a Q&A. Are there specific questions about any of the content or about the guide itself?
Hey, Kimberly, it's Mary again.
Hey, Mary.
How is the guide? How you doing, everybody? How is the guide being made available to people? What's the channel to, easily find it and download it?
Yeah, great question, Caroline. Maybe you can put the link in the chat box there for everyone, and I think it might be on one of the later slides. But it is available on the GCP website. It's also available on the Partnership for Gender Equity website, and it's just there. It's free. It's available. We're very eager for feedback, as Caroline said. It's can certainly be added to and improved. It is a living document, and we want to be available, both GCP and PGE together, to help encourage companies to pick it up and to use it.
Great. Maybe one of the actions of our
I think we lost
Hello?
you, Mary.
Yeah, go
sorry.
ahead.
That's great news. I'd like to suggest one of the actions of our CAN network could be for GCP to blast that guide out with just a few key application encouragement points so that we get it out to a wider audience as quickly as we can.
Yep. Great suggestion. Any other questions?
Kimberly, this is Caroline.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's a wealth of information. It's amazing because this is only a part of the information, of course, that you could show here. Having read the guide, you introduced us now to the business case, to the sustainability issues, and how to start the process with the conversation guides. I'm a super practical person, and I really like the conversation guides. I'm thinking now, because I think that really helps companies in the starting phase. I was wondering if you go through these, and then maybe you have even identified which could be the sustainable issues to address in gender that one would like to focus on. How do I move on? There, you said partner with people or organizations. How do I do that? How do I move that into action then?
Yeah, great question. The idea behind these conversations guides is really to lay the foundation for a plan, your own internal gender plan within your company. And again, we're talking about within the value chain. Obviously, there's other work to be done, we know, within corporate structures around participation of women in their own boardrooms and in our own executive committees. This is focused on the supply chain and the idea of building a plan that you can start to implement within your company. And some of the actions you will be able to take on your own by referring to resources that are outlined here in the guide. There's another obviously great tool, which is the Sustainable Farming as a Family Business Toolkit that we've referred to in this engagement guide that was created a couple of years ago by the prior Global Coffee Platform members and along with EVOS and others. That is a wealth of resources. And so I think by having a plan in place, by linking that plan to existing resources and then pulling in those partners that can help you along that path, then you'll actually really be well positioned to take action and to do meaningful work. And I think too, as Mary said, and as we're all interested in engaging in these conversations, so keeping, coming back to participate on these webinars. We really would like to have more engagement. I know today was a lot of kind of one-way conversation, but we are very eager to really create more dialogue and make sure that the work we're doing supports companies to get involved and do more.
Yeah, so thinking, this is Caroline again. Partnering with other organizations and companies is great. As I mentioned also earlier on, what we also would like to achieve or start is to look at the issues that the national coffee platforms have on their curriculum, on which they have identified as the key issues they would like to get addressed in their countries. And it would be ideal then to link these two together to companies that are ready to move this forward, and then identify the issues and countries where they want to contribute, and then link that to the national coffee platforms. This we will start. This is not a ready product or service yet, but this, as I have shown, we will push further throughout the year, that we manage that link between the two.
Yeah.
That there is also a conversation started between the public and the private sector, so-called, and the national coffee platforms, which where the public sector is also included.
Great. Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Share your views. What did you learn today? What do you think?
We've startled them.
This is Mary again. I'm sorry, I'm not basically a shy person, but this is not trying to be pushy on this call or anything. But what occurs to me is that there is so much good information, and I think that it would be a great focus for our CAN at this point to send ideas, and I guess to you, Caroline, of channels that we can leverage to get this information disseminated and use that as an engagement tool for the CAN. And so maybe if people could send you, if everyone on this call could send you one or two ideas about how they think this information could be pushed out, then that could be a starting point for, strategic, broader awareness and outreach.
Yeah, great idea, Mary. Thank you.
Caroline, maybe you want to go to the next slide, because that actually talks about next steps, and we are planning to host a couple of meetings as well. Before we do that, though, there is the reflections here in more detail beyond the questions and answers. But I mean, if anybody is willing to share a bit, if you've had a chance to read the guide or skim through it, we'd love to know what aspects of the guide would be most helpful, or do you think will be most helpful to your work? What would you like to see next in terms of webinars and support? And if anybody is willing to raise their hand, is there an action that you could take out of having participated in this conversation? And maybe these are things too that you could write in an email to Caroline and and me. Because it really takes your input for us to be able to improve and make sure that we're building greater support across the sector. Next time we're going to call on people. No, we don't want to scare you away from the call.
No, maybe we're going, exactly. Maybe we give a little homework to the group then to get back to us. That would be great, with some feedback. and we'll
Yeah,
build
we could
a
send a
group as
survey.
well. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so you want to go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Oh, great. There's one place where you can find the tool, find the engagement guide. Oh, Kendra's joining from the cotton sector. Okay, great. Okay. All right, we have 2 more minutes. Caroline, was there something, do you have another slide on next steps?
Yeah, before that, I would like to also run you through how to become active. So one, of course, is join the webinars on progress, learn, be inspired, and contribute, of course, because we really like to hear from you and learn what's usable and how to improve it. That's, yeah, we can only build good tools if we have feedback from the field, from the stakeholders using the tools. Use the engagement guide and build your strategy and find partners. Join the community of practice, maybe implement and connect with other practitioners. Kimberly, would you want to say a few words on the community of practice?
Yeah, it links to the following bullet point as well. And again, we'll talk about this in the next webinar. We have a group of companies and development organizations. Obviously, some of you that are on this call today that worked with us in the validation exercise for the common measurement framework, and that have expressed interest in continuing with that process. So the first step, because we know there's some momentum there and some interest there, we want to build out a small working group of those that are interested and able to start to integrate the measures into their existing frameworks and to share experience, to share experience in terms of the ability to collect the data, the challenges of collecting the data, and then what we're actually seeing out of the data in terms of impact. So that would be the next step, and we can talk about that in the next webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. And then, of course, you're always invited, and we will also invite you personally, 1 or 2 people, share your learnings and best practices with the sector for others to learn, adapt, and scale. Because, of course, one aim of the Global Coffee platform is to save resources and use the resources that are already available, make them better, scale them, and share the learnings so that we don't have to duplicate efforts. The next steps, oops, I jumped one, are here. So there will be, as Kimberly mentioned, our next webinar on the 9th of April, Introduction to the Common Measurement Framework. And then also a workshop taking place in Switzerland at the beginning of May to create a gender case in your company using the toolkits. So that's the engagement guide and the common measurement framework. With that, I would like to thank everyone who took the time to join us today. Thank you, Kimberly, for introducing us in greater depth to the engagement guide. Thank you, Mary, for your thoughts and ideas. And I really do hope that everyone gets back to us with ideas how to further push out the engagement guide, and hear you or see you again in beginning of April, when we will introduce the common measurement framework in greater depth. And until then, I wish everyone to be inspired on gender and start to become active. With that, I thank you, and
thanks everyone.
have a good day.